process.
Well, thank you very much, Councilmember. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here, and to those of you who are watching us on television or online, thank you for joining us as well. Let me quickly just introduce everyone who is before you today. Of course, Councilmember Shade is here. Mayor Pro Tem Mike Martinez is here as well. To my left, to most of you all's right, is Dr. Philip Wong, the Medical Director for the Austin-Travis County Health and Human Services Department. Dr. Wong, welcome. To my immediate right, we have Dr. Griffin Cole, a dentist with Fluoride Free Austin. Welcome to you. Temporarily seated over there, he'll be moving over after his presentation, is Dr. Paul Connett, a professor of chemistry from St. Lawrence University and also with Fluoride Free Austin. Dr. Connett, welcome. And over on my left, I have Dr. Cecil George, a family physician. Welcome to you, sir. And Dr. Delton Yarbrough, the chair of the Council on Dental Economics for the Texas Dental Association. Dr. Yarbrough, welcome to you. Okay, folks, as the council member indicated, this is a structured discussion between the two sides, and we will be observing time limits so that we ensure that everybody has equal opportunity to participate in the discussion. What I'll do is allow each side to open with about 10 minutes of an opening that they can divide up amongst their team members as they like. And gentlemen, what I'll do is when there's 1 minute remaining in the time, I'll hold up my index finger. When there are 30 seconds, I'll hold up my fist. Don't mean to be militant about it, but there that is. And as the council member indicated, I know that both sides have a lot of feelings and experience on this issue, and it's very, very important that each side be able to complete their answer and complete their thought before the other side responds to it. Councilmember? Yeah,
it sounds like we have now achieved broadcast in the council chambers. So if there are people who want to watch this in the council chambers, you're welcome to do that as well. So besides the atrium, you've also got the option to sit in comfy chairs across the way in the council chambers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So again, folks, we'll be beginning with 10 minutes on a side with the 1 minute and 30-second warning. Does either side care to go first? Anybody have a preference? No preference? All right. So without further ado, we'll begin with Fluoride Free Austin. You have 10 minutes.
And Mr. Chairman, I agree with Griffin to take the whole 10 minutes of this part of the meeting. All the council members would by now have been sent a free copy of this case against fluoride, which I wrote with 2 other scientists. So everything I'm saying is backed up in that book. So the case against fluoride, first of all, you can't control the dose. You can control the concentration at the waterworks, but you can't control the dose. You can't control who gets the medicine. It goes to everyone, young, old, sick, malnourished, everybody. You're forcing it on people who don't want it, and thus violating their right to informed consent to medication. It's very expensive for the ordinary person, especially the low-income families, to avoid fluoride if they don't want it in their water. The evidence of any benefit is extremely weak, and there is no adequate margin of safety to protect all citizens from known harmful effects. In Austin, you add water between 0.6 and 0.8 parts per million fluoride, and that is 200 times the level in mother's milk. So a bottle-fed baby in Austin is getting 20,000% the level of fluoride that a breastfed baby would get. The evidence of benefit is very weak. The World Health Organization maintains a database for tooth decay in 12-year-olds, and you'll find that it's coming down as fast in non-fluoridated countries as fluoridated ones. And if you look at that graph, the red line, which has been circled, that's the US figures. And to pretend, as the Center of Disease Control does, that line is coming down for tooth decay from the 60s to the 90s because of fluoridation is nonsense when you compare it with all those other countries which are non-fluoridated. If you compare US communities, the largest survey of tooth decay ever conducted in the United States, looking at 39,000 children in 84 communities, they measured tooth decay as decayed, missing, and filled surfaces. To explain that, there are 4 surfaces on the cutting teeth, the top 6 and the bottom 6, and 5 surfaces on the chewing teeth. Altogether, by the time all the teeth have come out, there's 128 tooth surfaces. What they found was, on average, for 5 to 17-year-olds, 2.8 decayed, missing, and filled surfaces for children who lived all their lives in fluoridated communities, and 3.4 in the non-fluoridated communities. And if you subtract one from the other, that means the average saving for 5 to 17-year-olds is 0.6 of a tooth surface out of over 100 tooth surfaces in a child's mouth. Large studies from Australia have found even less saving than this, 0.12 to 0.3 tooth surfaces. Don't be fooled by savings given as percentages.
Could you speak in like the other mic, because other people aren't being able to hear them?
In this one? Okay, is that better?
Might be a little better.
Okay. So don't be fooled by percentages. If you translate these differences in two small numbers, it's the vagary of doing just that. And the percentage can look high when the absolute saving of between 0.12 and 0.6 of a tooth surface is very small indeed. And there's growing evidence of harm. In the US, children are getting far too much fluoride. When they started this whole nonsense in 1945, they expected about 10% of the kids would get dental fluorosis, and in its very mild form. Now, according to the CDC, from last year, 41% of children between the ages of 12 and 15 have dental fluorosis, and not all in its very mild. 8.6% in the mild form, and 3.6% in the combined moderate and severe form. And I should also add that black Americans and Mexican Americans are more sensitive to fluoride's toxicity. They have higher rates of dental fluorosis than white children. And of course, less able in low-income families to avoid fluoride if they don't want to. So the key question is, when fluoride is damaging the baby's growing tooth cells, causing this condition of dental fluorosis, what is it doing to the other developing tissues like the bone, the brain, and the endocrine system? Here, I will concentrate on the brain. In my view, the baby's brain should not be exposed to fluoride at 200 times the level in mother's milk. And this is what the National Research Council said in 2006. It is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with the functions of the brain. That's their report from 2006, 507 pages, 1,100 references, and largely ignored and discounted by health authorities in all the fluoridating countries, including our own. Human studies. The NRC looked at 5 IQ studies. But now, as of this year, there are now 24 published studies indicating that moderate to high fluoride exposure is associated with lowered IQ in children. This is one of the most important studies. That they compared 2 villages, one with fluoride less than 0.7, average 0.36 parts per million, versus a village with 2.5 to 4.5 million parts per million of fluoride in their water. The average there was 2.47. They found a drop of 5 to 10 IQ points across the whole age range, and they found that the whole IQ curve was shifted for both males and females. And this is their curve. You see the black line there is the village with less than 0.7 parts per million, and the mauve curve is the village with between 2.5 and 4.5 parts per million. So you've got a whole shift of the IQ, which means you've got less intelligent children, very intelligent children, and more mentally handicapped. Now, Zhang estimated that IQ in children would be lowered at 1.9 parts per million of fluoride in the water. That's the threshold. That means there's an adequate margin of safety to protect all the children of a large population drinking water at 0.8 parts per million, like Austin. We need a safety factor of 10. And if you convert this concentration of 1.9 parts per million by assuming that on average the children were drinking 1 liter of water a day, then the lowest dose causing this harm is 1.9 milligrams per day. When you divide that by 10, you get a safe dose to protect everyone from this effect of 0.19 milligrams per day. Now, a dose of 0.19 milligrams a day would be exceeded by a child drinking 1 large glass of water at 0.8 parts per million. So there's no adequate margin of safety. The only way that US health authorities are able to deal with this is to completely ignore these studies and not do any studies of their own. Ding, just last month, or a couple of months ago, they looked at levels much lower than this. The range of fluoride in the water was between 0.24 and 2.84 parts per million, actually embracing the range that we use in the United States. And they concluded, overall, our study suggested that low levels of fluoride exposure in drinking water had negative effects on children's intelligence. Low levels. Scientists from the EPA's National Health and Environmental Effects Research Laboratory have classified fluoride, as with lead, as a chemical having substantial evidence of developmental neurotoxicity. 2 preposterous notions. What parent in their right mind would put their children's teeth above their brains? And what government would support a program aimed at lowering tooth decay by at most 0.6 of one tooth surface if it lowered the IQ of the population by even a small amount. Well, you know the answer to that, the United States. Other health concerns are documented in the chapters 13 and 19 in our book. Now, an explanation for the weak evidence of benefit is the concession by the Center of Disease Control in 1999 and again in 2001 that the major benefits of fluoride are topical. It works on the outside of the tooth, not from inside the body. Clearly, this was a point when fluoridation should have ended, because if it works on the outside of the teeth, fluoridated toothpaste is universally available. And if you use that approach of direct topical application, you don't expose the whole body, all your tissues, to a toxic substance, and you don't expose people to this substance who don't want to be exposed, which most of the people in this room are in that category. Now, the Reverend Andrew Young, you know who he was. He was an assistant to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., former mayor of Atlanta, former U.S. ambassador. He said, "I am most deeply concerned for poor families who have babies. If they cannot afford unfluoridated water for their baby's milk formula, do their babies not count? Of course they do. This is an issue of fairness, civil rights, and compassion. We must find better ways to prevent cavities, such as helping those most at risk for cavities obtain access to the services of a dentist." And I should point out that 80% of dentists in the United States do not treat children on Medicaid. Andrew Young continuing, "My father was a dentist. I formerly was a strong believer in the benefits of water fluoridation for preventing cavities. But many things that we began to do 50 or more years ago, we now no longer do because we have learned further information that changes our practices and policies. So it is with fluoridation." And a few days ago, Beatrice, Martin Luther King's daughter, also came out opposing water fluoridation. There are better alternatives. If you want fluoride, use fluoridated toothpaste. Give free toothbrushes, free toothpaste to low-income families. Most of toothcare is concentrated in low-income families. Low-income families need better diet, better dental education, and better access to dentists. Less sugar, more brushing. Less sugar means less tooth decay and less obesity, less diabetes, fewer heart attacks. Education is the better investment, not fluoridation, for Austin. Thank you.
Very much, sir, if you would mind taking your seat up here at the front. And the Texas Dental Association.
Yes. My name is Dr. Delton Yarbrough, and I chair the council, the TDA's Council on Dental Economics. The council is charged with dealing with community oral health issues. Water fluoridation falls within that realm. A little bit about myself. I grew up in a small town in West Texas, Fort Stockton. After I graduated from dental school in 1980, I went back and practiced there, and I've practiced there for 31 years. And the fluoride content of the water is 0.9 parts per million, naturally fluoridated on the low end. It has historically been as high as 1.4 parts per million. The overwhelming weight of credible scientific evidence shows that there is a direct relationship between fluoride levels in the drinking water and the prevention of dental decay. Science tells us that. The first U.S. city that fluoridated was Grand Rapids, Michigan, in 1945. And the children who consumed the fluoridated water from birth had 50 to 60% less decay than before the fluoridation started. The overall effectiveness of water fluoridation in preventing the tooth decay has been established at 19 to 40%. And the scientific evidence has consistently indicated that fluoridation of community water is safe and effective for both children and adults. Community water fluoridation is the process of adjusting the natural level of fluoride in the water. All groundwater contains fluoride at some level in its natural form. And the recommended therapeutic level is 0.7 milligrams per liter, or 7 parts per million. That recommendation is to protect against tooth decay. It's an oral health issue. And optimally fluoridated water is not toxic and is not harmful. It makes the tooth structure more resistant to decay in children and adults, and it does it throughout the whole lifespan. A review by the U.S. Task Force on the Community Preventative Services reported that water fluoridation reduces tooth decay by 30 to 50% in children and adolescents. And a study that was published in the Journal of Dental Research in 2007 found that fluoridation prevents 27% of cavities in adults. The former U.S. General, David Satcher, in May of 2000 stated that fluoridation continues to be the most cost-effective, practical, and safe means for reducing and controlling the outcome of dental decay in a community. And as of 2008, over 72% of the U.S. population on public water systems receive optimally fluoridated water. And that's 195.5 million people. And since 2000, there have been more than 310 U.S. communities in 40 states that have voted to adopt or retain their fluoridation programs. From an ethics standpoint, the U.S. courts have consistently ruled that water fluoridation is not a form of compulsory mass medication or socialized medicine. It is simply the adjustment of the natural fluoride level in the groundwater to optimum therapeutic levels to help prevent tooth decay. And in 1999, the Centers for Disease Control named fluoridation of drinking water as one of 10 great public health achievements of the 20th century. And fluoridation of community water supplies is the single most effective measure to prevent dental decay because the fluoride is incorporated throughout the whole tooth structure. More than 100 national and international health, science, service, professional organizations recognize and endorse the public health benefits of community water fluoridation for preventing dental decay. The water fluoridation in communities benefits everyone, especially those that do not have access to regular dental care. And the average cost for a community to fluoridate its water is between 50 cents and $1 per year per person in larger communities to $3 per year, $3 per year per person in small communities. And the studies have shown that for every dollar spent on fluoride, it saves about $40 in dental treatment. And there are literally thousands of epidemiological, clinical, socioeconomic, laboratory studies that have been conducted over the 65-year history of the fluoridation of community water supplies. Those studies confirm its safety and effectiveness. And this is an exceptional record, considering the torrent of criticism, the unsubstantiated scientific claims, and activist groups that have questioned this. It's come under great scrutiny, and the science has continually and consistently verified that fluoride ion in the water at therapeutic levels is safe and effective at greatly reducing the incidence of dental decay in the population. Now, outside of that, as a practicing dentist in an area where the fluoride content of the water on the low end is 0.9 parts per million, I don't really need the benefit of science to know how effective fluoride in the water is. I see it every day. Every day I go to work, patients open their mouth, I see it. There is a clinically observable difference between the native West Texans, the people that have grown up there, and people who are not indigenous or native to that area. And we see the whole spectrum because we're an oil field community, and we see, especially in this economy, we're seeing people from New York and Louisiana and the northern border. They're coming in to work on the oil rigs. We see migrant workers from Mexico. And consistently, when the patient opens their mouth, if I see those little white splotches, little white wavy lines that they didn't even know were there until I told them, I see a much, much lower incidence of filled, restored teeth, root canals, crowns, and it's not because their oral hygiene is good. It's not because they're brushing their teeth and flossing. Some of them are lucky if they find the floss once a week. It's because of the fluoride in the water. On the flip side of that, patient opens their mouth and we see fillings everywhere we see crown, we see root canals, and I don't see the little splotchy white places and the little wavy lines on the teeth. And I asked those patients, where did you grow up? In Louisiana. I saw one yesterday, the exact scenario. And she said, "Doctor, I spent half my life in the dental chair when I was growing up." And it wasn't because she wasn't taking care of her teeth. I mean, she wouldn't have had all that dental work in there if she hadn't been taking care of her teeth. Her oral hygiene was good. But she had a mouthful of restorations and work that had been done, and she had no fluorosis visible in the tooth enamel. And so, the difference is that we see in those scenarios, it is the fluoride in the water. That's what it is. And it works, and it's been proven over and over.
Dr. George, we have a couple of minutes remaining.
This is an issue with fluoride. I'm sorry.
Hit the push that button.
I don't have to keep it down all the time. Okay.
Push that.
It's the issue that we deal with all the time. Turn it off. The issue that we deal with all the time in any kind of health care, in any chemical that we put into our body. Any chemical, even our beneficial medications at inappropriate levels, are toxic. An excellent example of this is the medication warfarin. Warfarin, that's rat poison, right? Okay. It's also a very beneficial medication that helps to prevent and treat blood clots. And over decades, we have had studies, well-conducted scientific methodology that show the benefits of Coumadin, and also that have developed the appropriate therapeutic levels. The same thing has happened with fluoride. The appropriate therapeutic levels have been studied and studied and studied. We've got 65 years worth of experience with it. And the benefits are well demonstrated with little, if any, toxic effects at the appropriate therapeutic level.
Thank you both very much.
Larry, are we allowed to ask questions?
You are, Councilmember. What I'm going to do, though, I think, is bring forward the questions we had talked about in advance, just so that each side can respond to those, and then, as needed, I certainly would appreciate your interjections. So, folks, what we'll be doing from here on is allowing 2 minutes aside to respond to some questions submitted in advance by the council offices. And so if Fluoride-Free Austin doesn't object, I was going to let the Texas Dental Association have first go this round. And gentlemen, just as a way to continue the conversation, as you listen to some of the points made by Fluoride-Free Austin, and as you think about the most important points you want to make this morning, what would you identify as the most critical points for Fluoride-Free Austin to understand that you're not sure they yet understand?
To me, one of the things I'm most concerned about. There, am I on? Okay. One of the things that most concerns me is they do not recognize the systemic benefits of fluoride in the tooth structure. That the fluoride is incorporated into the entire tooth structure, and so it's not just a topical application. And we see that, and I can, vouch for that in clinical practice. When you get exposed root surfaces, they're more prone to decay. And you will see a slower rate of decay on the root surface in individuals that have consumed fluoridated water throughout their lifespan versus those who have not. And cervical decay is a real issue, especially in the elderly, as the gum tissue recedes. And it's troubling that they don't recognize that fluoride ion is incorporated into the entire tooth structure.
Dr. George, anything? And I'm sorry, I'm picking up some feedback. I know it's not my phone because I've turned it off of the mode. So folks that have cell phones near a microphone, if you could adjust that. Dr. George, anything else?
I think, to reiterate, we need to approach any issue where we put a substance in our bodies, we need to approach it from a true scientific approach with well-designed, well-controlled, peer-reviewed studies that show the benefits outweigh the risks. That's the only thing that I would want them to recognize.
Thank you both very much. 2 minutes for fluoride-free Austin. Same question. The most critical points for the other side to understand.
Yeah, I just wanted to address a couple of points on the scientific studies because I've looked at them as well. I'm a dentist, 18 years in practice, and all of the studies have one major flaw that they never really talk about, and that is you can't account for all the citizens who are relocating between non-fluoridated and fluoridated. They don't talk about home care. They don't talk about diet. It's always based on this is fluoridated and this is not. And the results that they always get are so close that it's really insignificant as far as what's better, being fluoridated or non. Beyond that, John Featherstone in 2000 in the JADA mag, which is the one that all the dentists read, showed that there was virtually no effect systemically that was beneficial to the teeth at all. It was all topical. I thought that was the end of fluoridation because this was in our magazine. It was boldly stated, no effect systemically. We know it incorporates in the tooth. The problem is that how it incorporates is it makes the tooth more brittle. It changes the collagen makeup of it. And that's the issue. If you want to apply it topically to get some kind of anti-carcinogenic effect, go for it. But to think that if you swallow it, it's going to be beneficial to your teeth is not true. And we've now shown this in hundreds of studies, correct? Mm-hmm. So, I think it needs to be made up. And on the Grand Rapids thing, because that was the first big test, it was between Grand Rapids, Michigan, which was fluoridated, and Muskegon, which was non. They started this study. After a couple of years, they were excited about the results, and they just ended it. This is in the Freedom of Information Act. They never even finished the study. The bandwagon had already started rolling. It was exciting, and they just went with it. So that study was never even completed. So I don't even like to quote that one because I think that's where things went awry early on.
As far as talking about true science, I absolutely agree with you. I'm a scientist. But listening to the presentation from the other side, we heard about endorsements, and we heard a lot about anecdotal evidence. Neither is scientific. We were told about thousands of studies.
Excuse me, sir. Please complete your thought. The time has expired. Sorry about that. Yeah, I was trying to signal to you. We had 2 minutes aside on the question. Let me just interject here for a moment and ask, is JADA the Journal of the American Dental Association? There are people watching with far less experience in this field than the participants, so to the extent we can avoid acronyms, I think it might be beneficial for everybody to understand what you're mentioning. Council members Shade and Mayor Pro Tem Martinez, were there questions that you had at this time that you wanted to add to the conversation?
Well, do you want to? I guess one of the questions that I had was on the slide that you presented with the two communities. I don't remember the names of them. They were Asian communities.
It was Zhang.
Oh, yeah,
It was Zhang,
Zhang
yeah.
in China.
Yeah. And so I wondered if we could look at that slide again because I had a question about it.
Go ahead, I'll find it.
And once Fluoride-Free Austin answers the council member's question, TDA will have a chance if they want to add anything.
Let's see. What I was going to ask about it was comparing the two levels, and I was. Yeah. Okay. That's the one. So, I mean, again, the point being that 2.5 to 4.5, that's toxic levels by anybody's stretch of the imagination, right?
No, that's where the margin of safety comes in. And also, please note that Zhang said that the threshold at which this effect was observed was 1.9 parts per million, which is uncomfortably close. Normally, when you find a toxic effect, this is a small study group of 512 children. When you find a toxic effect in a small study group, your job is to determine what is safe for the whole population. And that's the whole population of the United States is a lot of people. And this 500 children was fairly homogeneous. They were all Chinese. They all had the same nutrition, essentially. Basically, very, very homogeneous. But when we're protecting the whole population, we have to take into account the different ethnic groups in the country, different nutritional status, different health status. There's so many things. So normally, the routine is to assume that you need a safety factor of 10. That's called interspecies variation, to take into account the whole range of sensitivity in the human population. And as such, 1.9 parts per million offers no protection to the children, all the children drinking fluoridated water in Austin.
Okay. And what is the so our fluoride threshold is what?
What's our level here in Austin?
I'll let her.
Our goal is 0.7 parts per million.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm Jane Barazer, Assistant Director with Austin Water. Our the EPA standard is 4 parts per million. They have a secondary standard of 2 parts per million, but our goal and our range in Austin is 0.7 parts per million.
But that, if I may, Madam Chairman, point out, this brings me back to the first question. You can control the concentration, but you can't control the dose. So a child, for example, drinking 2 liters of water at 1 part per million is going to get more fluoride than a child drinking 1 liter at 1.9 parts per million. So you need a really strong safety factor when you can't control how much water kids are drinking and how much fluoride they're getting from other sources. That's the fatal flaw of fluoridation, the fatal flaw of using the public water supply to deliver medicine. You can't control the dose.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Yeah, and I was going to apply the same, because you were talking about the naturally occurring in Fort Stockton, which, by the way, I've spent a fair amount of time in Fort Stockton. I actually like Fort Stockton and love West Texas. But does that mean that so there's no additional fluoridation to the water because it's in such high natural occurring levels?
Yes, that is correct.
Press it. The green light.
Leave it green, and then it'll. If you leave it green.
Oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry. I thought I had to hold it down.
No.
Okay, I'm just a dentist. I'm not. Yes, the water that we use comes from an aquifer. The city's water source is well water, and for years we used the well water straight out of the aquifer. It wasn't diluted or changed in any way. It was very high in other minerals, especially magnesium. If you're not used to it, you got to be careful drinking it, or you'll end up staying in the bathroom for a period of time.
High concentration of magnesium salts, like milk of magnesia, has high concentration of magnesium salts.
Right, but to address what happened is they built a prison out there, and when they tested the water was good enough for us, but it wasn't good enough for the prisoners. It was too hard. So they built a reverse osmosis plant, and they mixed 50% of that reverse osmosis water with the natural groundwater, which reduced the fluoride level to 0.9 parts per million. We get the yearly water quality reports that every community gets, and I've never seen it below 0.9 parts per million.
Okay. And so just as a follow-up, this idea of controlling the concentration versus the dose, I mean, where is the point where a dose is too damaging? And I realize it's different for different kinds of people depending on their condition, but I mean, when you extrapolate, the average person may be drinking 8 glasses of water. Can you speak to that concept of?
Well, I suspect the average person doesn't drink 8 glasses of water. If they did, they would spend a great deal of time in the bathroom.
I mean, but I mean, typically I hear that from doctors. In fact, that was a question that we had at an earlier conversation. Was
the average person probably doesn't drink 8 glasses of water.
But it is a recommendation by a lot of people that you get 8 glasses of water a day, and I realize that maybe not everybody does that. I know there's lots of recommendations not everybody follows, but that was actually a question that I had earlier when we were looking at why the concentration was recommended to be lowered earlier in the year, was because we assumed that in part people were drinking more water because it's been part of what's been encouraged by doctors over the years, that we drink more water, and so. But I don't really have a sense for, I understand the concept of concentration versus dose, but I don't really understand how, is there any kind of correlation for, yeah, please.
Just use a round number. 1 milligram per liter, or 1 part per million, means that if you consume 1 liter of water, you're consuming 1 milligram of fluoride ion. The toxic dose is 10 milligrams. I mean, that's lethal, okay? When I say toxic, I guess it depends on who you talk to. So you drink 10 liters of water,
Okay. I didn't know that.
That kind of gives you an idea.
Right. And I do recognize that some people have different issues. I mean, that I was really, so the average person, is not going to.
I misused the word toxic in their definition. I'm talking about that could cause.
So okay. So and then I'll let Mike ask his questions. But the other question that I had was really this idea of the entire tooth versus the topical that you raised, and I wanted to hear what the other side had to speak to that.
Well, first of all, 8 glasses of water is 2 liters, and some people definitely drink more than 2 liters of water a day. In fact, as you've said, the Institute of Medicine actually recommends 3 liters of water a day. People working outside in a hot climate drink a lot of water. I was in Western Australia, and the miners there were drinking 10 to 12 liters of water a day, working outside in a hot climate. So again, you can't control the dose. And talking about average people is not the point. If you put a toxic substance in the drinking water, you have to protect everyone. This is your practice, and you've got to assure the public that everyone is protected. You can't go around saying, well, this is fine, this is a wonderful practice, but only drink 2 liters of water, or don't drink more than 2 liters of water. It's utterly preposterous. Again, you can't control the dose. You can control the concentration, but that's not the relevant thing. And as far as toxic doses are concerned, it's well lower than 10 milligrams. We have studies from China which indicate an increase in hip fractures at about 6 milligrams per day. And it's not just the dose that causes harm on the day. You're getting this for a lifetime. You're doing this every day. And 50% of that fluoride is accumulating in your bones over a lifetime. So what is it doing to your bones over a lifetime? Increasing hip fractures, increasing the incidence of arthritis, we believe, although the U.S. has not.
But the question is about the topical versus the whole tooth.
Okay, yeah, but I was just responding to their answers.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Because I think we were going to have equal time on the responses.
Okay.
You were.
Yeah. So you want to comment on the topical?
Can you ask your question again on the topical? Because I got involved in his answer.
Yeah, me too. And but the question was just, you're talking about the topical, and the other side is saying it's more, you need to look at the whole tooth structure and not just the topical. And
I don't believe there's a single clinical trial, randomized true trial, that proves that drinking fluoride benefits the teeth. It's not been done. There's plenty of studies out there that will show, well, look, this community is fluoridated and this one's not, better decay rates. That's not shown as the science.
No, they've never done a randomized clinical trial. You're absolutely right. And the study done by Warren from Iowa, which is a U.S. government-funded study, they did something unusual. Instead of comparing communities drinking different levels of fluoride in the water, they actually calculated how much fluoride the children were ingesting. And when they found that, they found there was no relationship with tooth decay and the amount of fluoride that was ingested in the groups of children. And incidentally, when we come to tooth studies, all the studies I cited have been coming from pro-fluoridation researchers and pro-fluoridation agencies. I haven't cited a single study here on tooth decay from opponents of water fluoridation. Their own studies indicate that it just simply doesn't work.
okay, other side.
Let me come back to TDA for a moment.
Okay.
It might be noted that, you hear, they say these studies aren't validated. We say those studies aren't validated. The studies that he's quoting out of China, Dr. Conant paid to have those studies translated and brought out of China, and the modalities of those studies have been questioned. So, it comes down to, who do you believe? Do you believe us? Do you believe them? And, do you believe the gigglers in the audience? Who do you believe? Okay. And the thing is, where the rubber hits the road, that means when the patient's rear end's in the dental chair and they open their mouth, what do we see? We're the ones that deal with it. We're the ones that deal with the fallout and the issues of no fluoridation in the water. The physicians, if what they're saying is true, and Dr. George can validate this, and I'll let him say so, that, everybody be walking around with pinned hips and et cetera, and low IQs. I consumed fluoridated water from the time I was 3 years old until now, which is a long time, and I still think my IQ is pretty good. And so, but I'll let Dr. George address the other part of that.
Well, if
About a half a minute, sir.
if the studies that you cite from China, which again, questionable methodology and questionable science, if they were really correct, then you'd expect everyone from West Texas to be less intelligent than everyone in other parts of the country where there's no fluoridated water. Right.
First of all, as far as the validation of the Chinese studies, Zhang, who did that,
but I think this is our response.
Oh, okay, okay.
Dr. George, your time was up.
Sorry.
So that's why I turned to him. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Go ahead.
Yeah, as far as the validity of the Chinese studies, don't forget we've got 24. They don't all come from China. One came from Iran, India, another from Mexico. But the point is this: Zhang updated that study and submitted it for publication in the Environmental Health Perspectives, which is the leading environmental journal in the United States. Is actually published by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, which is part of the U.S. the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, that was accepted for publication. So his methodology, which you're questioning, was actually validated by one of the leading environmental journals in the United States. I should add, it was later withdrawn, not for any methodological weaknesses, but because some of the information had been published before, and it's the policy of that journal not to publish information that's already been published. But the fact remains that it went through peer review, and that methodology met the standards of the leading environmental health journal in the United States.
Could I add something?
Sure.
I just wanted to add that, that 10 years ago, I would probably see maybe one fluoridation case a year where it was very noticeable. And in the past year, I'm seeing probably one a week, and I'm not exaggerating. So I know that this whole 41% thing is probably low. It's probably over 50% of these adolescents, 12 to 15, who are being exposed. And our government, the EPA and the Health and Human Services, lowered that level to 0.7 for a reason, because the science is overwhelming. It's not enough. It needs to be zero. But
zero isn't achievable because it naturally occurs in the water.
That's fine. But no artificial fluoridation is what I'm saying. If it's naturally occurring in some area, that's the way it goes. But in areas where we don't have it naturally occurring, or it's in very, very low amounts, don't supplement. Let us just drink clean water. I don't know why that's
we're at time there, gentlemen.
Okay.
Mayor,
and I know you're doing a great job, Larry, facilitating, but I'm going to ask that the audience please keep it down. It makes it very difficult for me to concentrate. And we've invited these people. I know Dr. Connett's come from a long way away. We know he's come from further away even than West Texas, but please don't disrupt our ability to stay focused. If you feel the need to clap and cheer, please go into the gallery where you can watch it in the council chambers or in the auditorium, because we're really trying to stay focused here.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Well, I wanted to re-ask the question that still is yet to be answered, but I don't want to ask anybody over here. I want to ask Dr. Wong if you can chime in on the question that Councilmember Shade asked, and that is, and this may not be exactly how she asked it, but I think we're both trying to head in the same direction, is if the recommendation is 0.7 milligrams per liter, what were the assumptions used to come up with that recommendation? Because in a memo released from the water utility, it says that the 0.7 milligrams per liter was based on individual community needs. What does that mean?
Well, I think some of the new recommendations that just came out, originally that range was based on some of the climate and temperature, because there was considered to be variations in some of the consumption of water based on the climate and temperature. But then they've come to realize that because of air conditioning and other factors, that variation is not as great, and so that's why they made the single recommendation 0.7. I thought you were actually going to ask about the other question regarding topical versus systemic.
That's fine. If you have more information, we'd love to hear it.
Well, just regarding that, I mean, I did, and I have spoken to the CDC, and the quote, what they actually say is that it's predominantly topical. But, I mean, it's actually in the Surgeon General's report, Oral Health in America. I mean, they state it's really because of they still acknowledge the systemic effect, but that because of the length of the time the tooth is at risk of caries during the post-eruptive phase. So because originally it was thought just to have that effect on children, but now they know that the effect also goes into adulthood. And so because of that long extended period of protection from the effects, that predominantly it's topical. But again, I spoke to CDC yesterday, and they still acknowledge some systemic effect also.
Could I respond to that?
Hang on a second.
Okay.
Can you speak, though, to any of the assumptions in the recommendation as to the consumption rates per day? Did they use an assumed average daily consumption rate?
They looked at that, and that is part of the information that they used in coming up with the recommendations of 0.7. So they had some, if you look at their actual data, estimates of what average consumption is and things like that.
Was there any information in this, I guess, new issue of standards? Was there any information or recommendation or conversation regarding the dosage versus the percentage? The doses of fluoride consumed based on their assumptions?
Well, again, I think that the amounts and estimates of what is consumed were taken into account in those in the recommendations.
Right.
So in other words, the lower dosage, the lower concentration was a recommendation based on what might be a different idea than previously was held in terms of how much was being consumed.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I got it.
I know fluoride-free Austin wanted to respond to CP, so I'll allow that. Gentlemen, you'll have a chance after they speak.
Dr. Wang is correct when he says the CDC used the word predominant, but if you look at the full quote from the 1999 paper, they said, "We used to believe that fluoride worked because before the teeth have erupted, fluoride had been accumulating in the enamel, so that when the teeth erupted into the mouth, those teeth would be protected from the acid attack from sugars being rotted down by bacteria." And they said, however, laboratory and epidemiological studies now indicate that not enough fluoride is incorporated before the teeth have erupted to actually offer much protection. And that's when they went on to say that the predominant benefit is topical, not systemic. In other words, they were admitting in 1999 that they got the mechanism of fluoride's action wrong for over 50 years and had misled pediatricians who were giving pregnant women fluoride tablets and babies fluoride drops because of this theory of incorporating it into the growing enamel.
Gentlemen.
I'll reiterate what I said earlier, that yes, the CDC did say what they said, but they also said that the fluoride is incorporated into the tooth structure, which it is. And that fluoride ion in the tooth structure reduces the susceptibility of the tooth structure to the acid attack from the plaque, which results in dental decay. And you will also see that once the lesion goes through the enamel into the underlying dentin, in individuals where they have, in areas where they have the higher fluoridation rates, you'll see a slower decay rate in the dentin than you do in people who are not in the higher fluoridated areas. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the root surface too. So it is incorporated in, and the CDC says that it is.
Dr. George, anything?
I don't have anything to add in the dental area.
Did Joel want to respond as well?
I think it's important to note that the group in the CDC who makes these comments are about 30 people. They're in the oral health division of the CDC. Most of them are dentists, if I'm not mistaken. So we've already got a little bit of a biased opinion there. It's not the entire CDC saying this, but once a group makes a comment, then it's adopted, and that's what goes out, and we all assume it's the entire CDC.
And in fact, if you go back to that 1999 statement from the CDC, they were 6 years out of date on health studies. They cited a review in 1993, and as you've already seen, their proposal that fluoridation was coming, tooth decay was coming down in the United States because the percentage of the population drinking fluoridated water was going up, was either totally incompetent, meaning they weren't aware of the World Health Organization data, which showed that these declines were going on in nearly every country, whether it was fluoridated or not. But so that was either incompetent or highly misleading.
Anything else, gentlemen, on that? Anything else from you all? Let me check in with the council members. Questions that you wanted to ask at this time. There are a couple of others on our agenda that we could get to, but is anything else okay? I think we've covered the item related to the Centers for Disease Control's assessment of fluoridation. There was an item here added by the council having to do with the results of removal and addition of fluoride in other American communities. I know Dr. Yarbrough mentioned the number of communities who have added fluoride, and it came up, I believe, in the PowerPoint presentation as well. Let me go to TDA first to speak to any difference in results that you observe, as you mentioned earlier, having to do with whether fluoride is added or removed.
I assume you're referring to question 5.
Yes, it's
No.
big number 4, Roman numeral, little Roman numeral 5, the results of, and it sort of bridges also into the
But the question is what do you understand is happening in communities that remove fluoride from the drinking water? Okay. Right. I'm not aware of any recent studies in the U.S. that have documented caries prevalence following complete stoppage for more than a year, not recent studies. On the flip side of that, in the U.S., the trend over the last 10 years has been to either maintain the existing fluoridation or to start fluoridating. There is one instance or two instances that I will bring up. They're older studies. One was the Antigua, Wisconsin. They began fluoridation in June of 1949, and they ceased in November of 1960. And after they ceased, after 5.5 years, second graders had over 200% more decay, and fourth graders had 70% more. Sixth graders had 91% more than the same ages in 1960. And so citizens reinstated the water fluoridation there in October 1965 based on the severe deterioration of the oral health of the children. And then the other one was Galesburg, Illinois, which their public water supply came from an aquifer from a deep well water, and the fluoride content of the water was 2.2 parts per million. In 1959, their water source was switched to the Mississippi River, which the concentration was 0.1 part per million, and the data revealed a 10% increase in the number of decay-free 14-year-olds, a 38% increase in decay overall. 2 years later, the community began fluoridating at 1 part per million due to the severe declining oral health of its children.
Again, you have to look at the quality of these studies. I think the Antigua study was highly politicized by the state, not wishing to see a community like Antigua escaping their practice. So I question the validity of that particular study. But if you go to the slide projector, if the technician would put on the slide here, you'll see these are 4 modern studies, not from 1949 or 1968, but from 97, 2000, 2001, and 2000, all conducted by essentially pro-fluoridation research scientists. The first one is from the former Eastern Germany. When the two Germanys combined, East Germany stopped fluoridation. They didn't find that the tooth decay went up when they stopped. Same with Cuba. The one city, La Salud, when they stopped fluoridating, tooth decay didn't go up. The same in British Columbia, and the same in the community in Finland. So I don't think these scare tactics of what will happen if Austin stops fluoridating its water is validated by the latest science here. It may be that when they stopped fluoridation, they took other measures to fight tooth decay, but that's exactly what you should do in Austin as well. Make sure that the low-income families have access to free toothbrushes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Do we have the list of all the communities that have stopped fluoridation? I think
the
Council Chair wanted to see that, yeah. Will you show that? I think that's important. Councilwoman Shade, while he's getting that ready, I mentioned at the last meeting that the National Kidney Foundation no longer endorses, and that is true. So I don't know what, if you go on their website, I've got some documentation from their website. They are taking no position on fluoridation anymore, and I think for obvious reasons. It's all the studies and the NRC report that came out in 2006. I've highlighted on the very back page, no position. They're not endorsing it.
They're not for it, but they're not against it.
Well, I think they have to be careful on that.
Okay.
There's the list of studies. This is the cumulative totals from 1990 to 2000, the cumulative total from 1990 to 2010, and here is a list of the towns which have stopped fluoridation. The most notable was Calgary in Alberta. In fact, tomorrow, May the 19th, is when they will officially stop fluoridating. That's 1.1 million people, where the council decided that they could no longer force fluoridation on their citizens in uncontrolled doses. They did stress that uncontrolled doses.
Gentlemen, did you want to respond to some of the points there, just on the removal piece?
And some of the references to the European countries, to Cuba, he did mention they've taken other measures. Specifically, some of those add fluoride to the salt. That's a real dose-related issue if you want to look at it from that standpoint. The healthcare delivery systems are different in Europe than they are over here. You have basically government-run healthcare programs, and they come into the schools. Every 6 months, every child in there gets their teeth cleaned. They give them fluoride varnish. They have free access to dental care. It's not like that over here, and that will not happen over here. Well, it might, but hadn't happened yet.
For the record,
so we'll have the floor, and so it goes back to what I just said. There have been over 310 communities that have instigated water fluoridation, within the last 10, and they're in over 40 states. And, so if you look at both sides of that, and there are reasons that communities stop fluoridating water, and sometimes it's just strictly economics. They don't have the money to do it. And it has nothing to do with that they think that fluoride is toxic or that there's a bad thing going on. They just don't have the money to do it, so it doesn't happen. They got to make cuts somewhere. They're not like Congress. They can't print their own money. And so, recently, San Diego, California, which was the largest non-fluoridated city in the U.S., they began their program in 2011. And of the largest 50 cities in the U.S., there are only 5 that remain unfluoridated. Those 5 are Fresno and San Jose, California, Honolulu, Hawaii, Portland, Oregon, and Wichita, Kansas. And so, the other side of that coin is there's a whole bunch of them.
You wanted to respond?
Yes, only 4 countries in Europe actually fluoridate their salt. But the key difference between fluoridating salt and fluoridating the water, with fluoridating the salt, you leave freedom of choice for the people. There's no freedom of choice for the people in Austin, Texas. And in terms of swapping how many people fluoridate and how many people don't fluoridate, only about 400 million people in the world drink fluoridated water out of 6 billion. And most of those 400 million live in North America. We are the odd ones out. Only 8 countries in the world have more than 50% of their populations drinking fluoridated water. And the reasons given for most of the European countries, 98% of Europe does not fluoridate its water. And the 2 main reasons were, 1, we don't believe that we should force fluoride on people that don't want it. They have a much greater sensitivity to human rights, individual rights, especially the right to informed consent to medication. And secondly, they did not feel that all the health questions had been resolved. And they certainly have not been resolved today. If you look at the National Research Council report from 2006, they produce a whole litany of studies that need to be done. And they haven't been done. And there appears to be no intention. For example, perhaps the opposition or promoters of fluoridation could tell me what study that has convinced them that we can safely ignore these 24 IQ studies from China, India, Iran, and Mexico. What single study? What studies have actually looked at lowering of IQ in the United States, in Canada, in the other fluoridating countries? What studies can you cite, specific studies can you cite, which alleviates your concern about all these studies showing a lowering of IQ?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to banter with a research scientist oversighting this study and that study. Wet-fingered clinical dentist and experience in the dental office with what we see. But we're talking IQs. To me, it seems that in a lot of these places that they're citing that they stop fluoridation or they don't fluoridate. Maybe they just don't think teeth are important. I don't know. And sometimes in we see that concept in other places too. But I mean, I can let Dr. George address the IQ issues and the medical aspects of that.
The communities in West Texas, I grew up in a community where the fluoride in the water was much higher than what is considered an acceptable dose now. And if you are going to use those studies and use the information from that, then you would have to assume that the people in the community that I grew up in are less intelligent than people in communities where they don't fluoridate.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's true, and I don't think that you can show that anywhere.
Yeah, but you haven't done the studies.
Just 1 second, please, sir.
The data is there, and it's there in the United States. I mean, it can be easily obtained. You can compare fluoridated versus unfluoridated. You've got years of fluoridation studies, or not studies, but years of fluoridation experience where you can look at the differences of IQ in particular areas versus others. There's not any difference.
But how can you possibly say that if you haven't done the studies? We're talking about subtle changes here. You're not going to spot it walking down the high street that a child has 2 or 3 IQ points different from another child. It requires science. And the simple fact is that in the United States, the health authorities are simply not looking at really possible relationships. The relationship between fluoridation and arthritis, even though arthritis rates are going up the wall. A relationship between fluoridation and hypothyroidism, again, even though those rates are going up and up and up. So instead of doing the science, you get what we've heard today. There's a straight attempt to criticize the methodology. You criticize the methodology of studies that have found harm. And instead of using this superior knowledge of methodology and using it in the United States to do it scientifically, not, I don't see anybody with lowered IQ in West Texas, they're not doing the science. And that's what's shocking. So when you refer to thousands of studies which show this, that, and the other, you haven't yet cited a single primary health study. Not a single primary health study have you cited which have demonstrated to you or anybody else that fluoridation is safe.
I also think it's important to point out now, because they've mentioned naturally occurring fluoride several times, as have you. That's not what's in Austin. It's hexafluorosilicic acid. It's a waste product from the fertilizer industry. I think that should end the argument right there. If you have naturally occurring fluoride in your water, although it's not a nutrient, it's probably there for a reason.
Okay, we're going to get to that specific question, aren't we, in just a minute? But just to follow up on the subject that we're on, though naturally occurring, I mean, so I guess I have 2 issues, and I think it was really interesting the point about how much is provided in the way of health care, dental care, in particular in the European countries, and you cited how the differences are between the socialized medicine versus what we don't have here, and I think I'm guessing that's a large part of why the decision is made to if you assume that there is a level that is a point of I don't know, I don't have the scientific words for it, but the point of diminishing returns, there must be some number where the amount of fluoride provides more benefit than a negative impact, and you want to achieve that number. I mean, that's essentially what the CDC's recommendation is based on. The idea that if you have whatever that number is, let's say it's 0.5. So if 0.5 is the number that is the concentration that allows the vast majority to get the greatest benefit, I guess my question is, and there's a cost associated with it that's relatively inexpensive in comparison to people having dental care, twice a year checkups, the kind of things that were mentioned. Do you have a cost comparison? I mean, because it is a struggle from to the thought of having something that provides a benefit to the majority of the community, and that prevents and knowing that they're not going to get. I mean, how much would it cost, I guess, to spend on dental care in Europe for versus to fluoridate the water, I guess is the question, to achieve that level.
Well, let me go to TDA.
I don't think anyone can answer that question, but it is interesting to.
Let me go to TDA first.
As far as the cost in Europe, I mean, it's at the taxpayer's expense. And their taxes are really high over there. You think $4 a gallon gas is bad over here. Try $10 a gallon. And it's the system over there that takes care of the healthcare needs of the population. And we don't have that system here. It doesn't work like that. I mean, it's the Medicaid providers there are not as many Medicaid providers as are needed to treat that population. And so, it's not just about what we've been talking about here. You're also going to get into some socioeconomic things.
So let me just ask, this is a more easy way to get to the question, I guess. What would it cost for for a kid to get proper dental care if they could, for getting Medicaid or anything else? I mean, if it was going to the dentist twice a year, getting the treatments that were necessary in a doctor's office, I mean, what's a guess? Just a ballpark. I mean,
if you brought the child in every 6 months, which is what's recommended for cleanings and checkups and so on, you're probably going to be in a range between $100 and $200 per visit. So, out-of-pocket expense with no treatment, between $200 and $400 a year.
Okay.
Could I say something on that too? Just to go further on that point, I would rather treat these 2 or 3 cavities that might appear, assuming that water fluoridation works, which I don't think it does, for a few $100s than I've done about 6 or 7 full mouth cases on these cases where the teeth are just destroyed, and it's minimally $30,000 because you're restoring every tooth in the mouth, and just depending on what's involved. And by the way, and every dentist will agree to this, when you're cutting on a tooth that's been modeled, you can just cut all day. There's no stopping point. It's just chalky and brittle. You just got to pick a point to stop. That's how bad it is.
I would again emphasize that tooth decay is concentrated in about 15 or 20% of American children, and children from low-income families. 80% of dentists in the United States do not treat children on Medicaid. So this is the problem. If you compare with the wonderful situation that we have in Europe with America, America does not come out looking very good, and nor does the dental profession. As far as the word natural, we've heard the word natural mentioned several times. There's nothing safe about something being natural. Arsenic is natural, and that occurs in the water in the western states, and they're spending a fortune removing this natural toxic substance. If you're interested in natural, then the natural level that we should look at with great respect is the level in mother's milk, and that is remarkably low. Who do we believe knows more about what the baby needs? Mother Nature, evolution, or the American Dental Association? Now, as far as dental decay, even though many cities in the United States have been fluoridated for 20, 30, 40 years, you still find high pockets of dental decay in those cities, and they're in the areas of low income. And so this notion that fluoridation somehow adjusts for inequity, for low income, is not the fact. You've still got a huge problem in the inner city in fluoridated countries.
We're at time there. So. Let me try to bridge us. We have about a half an hour or so remaining. I want to respect the Mayor Pro Tem's time. I can hear us begin to talk about what I think is the last main topic of the discussion, which has to do with differences among the impact of fluoride that occurs naturally in the water versus fluoride that's applied chemically. We just heard from Fluoride-Free Austin, so let me come back over to the Dental Association and have you try to address what you perceive to be the differences in naturally occurring fluoride versus fluoride that's chemically applied in terms of its impact.
There are studies, recent studies, 2008, 2006, that have shown that the fluorosilicates and fluorosilicic acid is a fluorosilicate, that when that enters the water stream, there's a 100% dissociation, 100% ionic dissociation. That means it pops apart. And they also showed that there was no intermediary byproducts, which means that the fluoride didn't go in that process and do something strange, and there were no after byproducts, which means that the fluoride ion did not go over somewhere else and link up and make something weird. That fluoride ion stays in solution as fluoride ion, which is the same fluoride ion that leaches into the water through natural formations. Now, you're going to hear them say, you know, they're putting toxic waste in the water, and you know, we can discuss that later if council has questions. We don't have time to go into that right now.
I'd like to respond to that.
Just one second. Just one second. Another minute or so on this side. If Dr. George had anything you wanted to add.
The study I think you were referring to was the study done at the University of Michigan. And you're quite right, except you missed out two vital words. That was at pH 7. That same study showed that if the pH dropped to as low as 3 or 4, then there was reassociation, forming a very stable and persistent pentafluoro complex. Now, whilst you divide at the waterworks, when this stuff hits the stomach, it can recombine. This is an equilibrium. So those same two entities, the hydrated silica and the fluoride ion, when they get into the stomach, can then, at the pH of 1 and 2, can reform this pentafluoro complex.
Anything? Any response?
Do you have any studies that show that that happens in the stomach? I mean, do you have any clinical studies
Well, we know that
show that happens in humans?
Yeah, look.
No, I asked the question, it needs a yes or a no.
No, I'm referring to the study that he cited. He missed out the critical fact that it's pH dependent. And when the pH falls to 4, all I've added into that is the knowledge that the pH of the stomach is between 1 and 2. And there, from a chemical point of view, a chemist's point of view, applying basic equilibrium, it's highly reasonable to assume that there's reassociation.
The test was down to pH 3.5.
What's that?
The test showed that it stayed that way at a pH down to 3.5.
Well, we're talking about a pH in the stomach of between 1 and 2, so you're well below the
Well,
level at which there's
it goes back to
recombination.
the studies.
What?
It goes back to the studies. Do you have studies, medical studies, documented peer-reviewed science that shows that that happens in the human stomach?
I think you've got the problem when it comes to medical studies because you're doing nothing in the United States. All you do is to study teeth, as if that was the only tissue in the body.
Well, the studies, the data is there so far as fluoridated versus non-fluoridated in the United States. My question for you, and I guess maybe a challenge for you, is why don't you go get that data? Because it's there. It's there.
Okay.
He's been studying this for almost 2 decades and can cite any study that's out there on this. I don't think I would challenge him on that.
Where's the
Just
data?
just one second, Dr. George. He's got the floor for the moment.
Well, and I just think it's, you know, we're arguing apples and oranges here. Again, if you believe the tenant that drinking fluoride is beneficial to your teeth, then this is a non-argument. But the science just doesn't show that. Wipe it on your teeth all you want. Drinking it's not going to do a thing for your teeth except deleterious effects, which we've shown through all these pictures. And we've shown through thyroid studies and kidney studies and bone studies. It's all out there. And by the way, whenever a top researcher, and I'm talking about some big names, toxicologists, do any kind of studies where they prove that fluoride does negative effects, they get blacklisted. They get no more funding. They're done. Like
Okay,
Dr.
but
Mullinex, Dr. Marcus, there's tons of these people. And it's sad to me because they're researchers who have no agenda. They don't care one way or the other. They're just doing the study. And they say, oh, my God, the rats developed cancer with sodium fluoride. Or these rats had lowered IQ. Well, that can't be right. Let's do it again. Same results. No more funding for you.
But I guess when you talk about the fluoride causing these problems, are you talking only about the artificial fluoride, or are you talking about any fluoride?
Well, sorry.
Because I guess the follow-up to that would be we have lots of communities that have high levels of natural, some higher than others, some lower than others. So again, to me, from a layman's perspective, the idea is there's some number that you're trying to get to that's the right number. Are you suggesting that we remove it from the naturally occurring?
We might get to that point, but I think there's 3 levels of argument here. One is millions of people have had their lives ruined by natural fluoride in India and China. And I've cited some of the studies, the bone studies, the brain studies, and so on. The second level of argument is I think that hexafluorosilicic acid may well be worse than this natural fluoride, which has also damaged health. And thirdly, we're not dealing with the pure hexafluorosilicic acid. We're dealing with a substance which is contaminated with all kinds of toxic substances, including arsenic. And sometimes the level of arsenic that is reached after dilution is 1 part per billion. And 1 part per billion gives an incremental cancer risk of 1 in 1,000. But from a legalistic point of view, the MCLG, the maximum contaminant level goal, which is deemed the safe level from science, is 0 for arsenic. So when we add these industrial grade chemicals to the water, we are exceeding the MCLG for arsenic. We are, however small or large the cancer risk is, we're increasing the cancer risk of the total population. And I would also point out that this chemical is coming from the phosphate fertilizer industry, and the same rock that is mined for phosphate, superphosphate, is also mined for uranium. So in addition to arsenic and lead and other toxic substances, you've also got traces of radioactive isotopes. I think most people would cringe if they really knew that what we were doing here is not only using the public water supply to deliver medicine, which is a lousy medical practice, but we're also using the public water supply to get rid of hazardous waste.
TDA, if you wanted to weigh in on the council member's question.
I would like first to respond. Dr. Griffin keeps holding up this picture, and I heard him say that people who drink fluoridated water, their teeth fall apart when you cut on them, they're brittle and they're chalky. That's an absolute false statement. I've been cutting on fluoridated teeth for 31 years. At therapeutic levels in the water, the enamel sometimes is so hard and resistant that you'll get a little pinhole in the enamel. The enamel won't decay. The decay will get into the dentin, and it will spread out, not at a really high rate, not as much as in unfluoridated areas, but the enamel is so hard that the patient will come in and go, I was eating last night and this tooth broke and I got this huge hole. Well, that huge hole's been there for a year or 2 years or 3 years. It's just that the enamel is so hard that it has not cavitated. And what he's showing there and what he's talking about is fluoride levels at the higher end of the spectrum, which is 4 parts per million, where you do get that effect at that level. But we're not talking about that here. We're talking about therapeutic levels, which is 0.7 parts per million. That does not occur.
Dr. George, anything on this?
I don't have anything to add about the dental part of it.
No. Very well, sir.
But on the just to follow up then, so I still am not clear on the differences between first of all there are lots of other studies that attribute health risks because of using coal for our energy. I mean, how do you connect fluoride? I mean, I literally saw a presentation not too long ago about using coal to fuel our society. We are causing thyroid problems, low IQ. I mean, why fluoride? Why are you so sure that it's the fluoride that's creating these issues?
Because of all the studies that are out there. I mean,
But I mean, how do you differentiate? What are the other common things that are happening in those communities? Or I mean, how do you? It's very hard to separate, I guess. I mean.
Well, I would argue that same point on the pro side. How do you prove that fluoride works when you're comparing these two communities that have so many things going on?
Well, because they're only looking at teeth. I mean, I'm really intrigued with the idea of the rest of the body and because that's different. But I mean, if they're looking at the teeth, and it's naturally occurring, I think that the issue is again what happens in those communities that have that the naturally occurring is very low, the naturally occurring is very high. Or if the naturally occurring is very low, then they add something to it. So is there a difference? I mean, it's...
Okay. Let me answer the first part of your question because it's really important. How do we know that it was fluoride and not some other factor, coal burning or something, that was influencing those studies. Well, I'll take the Zhang. I'll take the Zhang study because I visited the two villages, and I can tell you right off the bat, they have more or less the same housing, the same nutrition, the same occupation. Zhang controlled for lead exposure, Zhang controlled for iodine intake, and all the normal social factors were controlled for. But he did something else. So in terms of, it was pretty certain that the only difference was the fluoride levels in the drinking water. You also throw in the fact we don't just have one study, we have 24 studies, and they're remarkably consistent in their findings. So if there's some hidden cofactor, it's mysteriously working in all 24 studies. And the other thing I should point out that in 2 studies, they looked at, in one case, the fluoride levels in the blood, and that correlated with the lowering of IQ. So you've come closer to actually the body experience. There's the fluoride in the blood. The more fluoride in the blood, the lower the IQ. And in another study, they did the same thing with the urine. The more fluoride in the urine, which reflects how much of the daily intake of fluoride, the lower the IQ. And that was a very, very strong correlation. And that was the Ding study. So it isn't just we take any two villages and we won't bother to control. In a good epidemiological study, that's exactly what you have to do, is to control for all these other factors.
Just about a half minute for Dr. Cole.
I just want to touch real quickly on Dr. Yarborough's comment about fluoride and how it makes the teeth so strong. It absolutely makes them brittle. That's the whole point. It makes them brittle. Whether it makes them resistant to decay, I don't want to argue that point. It makes them brittle. And pharmacists are taught in pharmacy school that for a while there they experimented and added fluoride to some of the osteoporotic medications because they thought, wow, teeth are bones, it strengthens them, let's add it to those.
Thoughts,
Increased hip fractures in all those areas. They took it out immediately. It was all quiet. No one ever talked about it. Again, this is in the Freedom of Information Act. So there's no dispute. It makes it brittle.
Need to stop you there. I think we had asked, these folks responded first. Let me come back to TDA on the council member's last question. Anything to add?
I don't remember.
The studies that you cite from China, from India, from Iran, if I was going to prove a point about a particular population, especially if there is a massive volume of data out there about that population, our population in the United States, I would do the data collection on that population in the United States. The other side could do that. They could do that very easily, collect that data and present that. And my question is, why not?
Well, first of all, it's not as easy as you said, because the council member brought out the key thing, is controlling all the variables. In the case of China, it's very easy to do because you have this remarkable situation of very stable populations with everything essentially identical except for one factor, how much fluoride there is in the drinking water. So the studies are easier to do there. But this is a practice that you're defending. You are defending putting a toxic substance into the drinking water. You are satisfied that all you have to do is to criticize the methodology of any study that causes harm. I think the onus is on you, not on me to do the studies, but on the U.S. government to sponsor these studies, and they do not seem willing to do it. And in fact, Griffin was absolutely right. Phyllis Mullinex was actually the first person to do a study which showed that fluoride damages animal brain, that animals treated to fluoride before they were burned were hyperactive, those treated after were hypoactive. She was the chairman of the first toxicology department of any dental school in the United States. When she published that study, she was fired, and she was told her work was no longer relevant for dentistry. That's how much interest there is in doing real science in the United States on this issue. They're working backwards. This practice is the holy cow of medicine, of dentistry in this country, public health dentistry. It's the holy cow, and everything is being done to protect this practice rather than protecting the health of the people.
Guys, I have to interject here. It's 10:32, and the Mayor Pro Tem informed me he needs to depart within the next couple of minutes for his other commitment, which will break our quorum, and we are an official committee meeting. So, Councilmember Shade and Mayor Pro Tem Martinez, at your discretion, I was just going to allow each side another minute or so to conclude, and then we'll conclude officially. So, We did begin with fluoride-free Austin, so I think I should give TDA the last word. But fluoride-free Austin, if each of you have 1 minute if you'd like to say anything.
I know that you all have probably closing comments that are prepared, but I would like, if you can, add in your closing comments the one last question that I have, which is, we're Austin, Texas. I mean, we follow health policy. I mean, the last comments that Dr. Conant made was about, the United States government not doing its job to do this kind of research and to do this kind of study. And we should be looking at the information as it applies locally. I think that. But we're, one municipality, and I guess the strategy of this group to have at the local levels changes made to force the United States government to do that kind of testing? I mean, I'm very nervous. I mean, I'm nervous about making a change that goes against what the recommendations are for good public health policy with people who are supposed to be responsible for that in our nation. I mean, it's risky. So, I don't know if the city of Austin could do it. We were talking about that for a minute ago, Mike and I, about, well, what if the city of Austin were to do the kind of study that you're talking about? But again, I don't even know how we would be able to engage in that. But it's, so maybe think about that in terms of your closing comments. And again, I'm sorry that we obviously will be continuing the conversation, but we will have to end this meeting this day.
So Dr. Conant, I'll give you a minute. Dr. Cole, a minute. And
are we going to go second? We started. I think we should go second.
Well, I was going to allow the Dental Association the last word since you all had the first.
Oh, okay. All right. Could I have the projector again, please? Yeah. This slide shows a lot. On the left-hand column, you see the level of fluoride in the drinking water as it goes up, and as you expect, the level of dental fluorosis goes up. That's exactly what you expect. And this business about not being able to recognize it, 25% of the tooth is covered with very mild, 50% mild, 100% moderate. And you remember the figures, 3.6% of kids in America between 12 and 15 have moderate or severe dental fluorosis, 8.6. Now, if you look at the second column, you see that whilst the relationship between the fluoride levels in the water is very strong with dental fluorosis, it's extremely weak with the percentage of children in caries. And once again, this is their researchers, their pro-fluoridation researchers. One relationship is strong, the other one is weak. And as far as Austin and being risky, it seems to me what is risky is exposing a whole population to a toxic substance, especially when you've got a pretty vocal group of people that don't want you to do it. That, to me, is risky.
Dr. Cole.
I just want to say that I'm pretty passionate about this, but I do love my profession, and I think we started off well-intended. I really believe that. But this has been a 50-year experiment that is not working, and it's probably more deleterious, as I mentioned, than beneficial. Don't be scared. Austin should be the leader in this. We're a green city. Let's take it all the way. There will be no changes in decay rates. There will be nothing. You won't even notice anything except we'll be drinking clean water. And let's just
saying that because we've got 0.5 naturally occurring.
No, I want it 0.
Okay.
I want to just drink my water and know that if I want fluoride, I can get it from a toothpaste or something. I don't want to drink it in my water. I don't want my kids. You don't want your kids drinking it. Trust me on this. So, one final word. Let's assume that I'm wrong about everything. Paul Conant's wrong, and they're right. Fluoridation works. Isn't this still an ethical issue? What other medicine can you take with no dose, no rules? It's just across the board, everybody drink it, and there's no limit. I really think that is a huge issue beyond everything else.
Doctors Yarborough and George, a minute each.
As far as the studies, if you want the studies, it hasn't been a 50-year experiment. It's been a 65-year reality. And there's thousands and thousands and thousands of studies out there that can be accessed and documented that will verify that fluoride at the therapeutic levels in the water is the most effective method of helping to prevent tooth decay that we have.
The medical studies don't bear out the toxic effects systemically of fluoridation. They don't bear it out at the therapeutic levels. You also said, Why are we here? We're here because y'all have raised this issue. And if it's an issue that I was going to prove, I would get the data that's out there to prove it for this population. I wouldn't cite Chinese studies or Iranian studies or Iraqi studies or whatever else. I would cite studies about the population with which we're dealing.
On behalf of Mayor Pro Tem Martinez and Councilmember Shade, thanks to all four of you, and thanks to you all very much.
Yeah, we'd like to reiterate our thanks. This is very, very helpful. Okay, excellent. Then we'll get it. Thank you. And thank you for coming.